honor to introduce Lexi Kohansky, who is a Jewish educator and Torah scholar who focuses on empowering those of us who have not felt at home in Judaism to own our texts and traditional life ways. She is a thought leader in the realm of trans Torah and has given talks on trans identity in Torah at synagogues on both coasts and in Scotland, and in the past for My Jewish Learning. Her YouTube channel, T for Torah, is likely the only active public Torah learning space on the internet entirely by and for transgender Jews. And she's designing a first of its kind tabletop role-playing game to teach biblical Hebrew. Lexi serves as the Torah Studio's Director of Online Learning. We're really honored to have you here with us today, and I look forward to learning along with everyone who's joined this class just as much. So feel free to share where you're tuning in from in the chat, and Lexi, take it away.
Thanks, Mira. Hi, everyone. I'm Lexi. I'll be guiding us through the next hour. And we'll be talking about embodiment in exile, lessons from a trans Jewish experience. I'm really excited to see everybody here, either people's faces or people's names. It's good to see it all in the chat. Just as kind of like a housekeeping note, I've got two screens up. There's this one that I'm looking at right now, which has my slides on it. And then there's this one over here, which has your faces on it. So I might be looking back and forth between them, but either way, I'm looking at us. So just checking out where everybody's from. I am calling in from Lenape land from Washington Heights in New York City. Ugh. Everybody's from everywhere. This is so nice. And I'll be excited we'll have some more moments where you'll be invited to share stuff in the chat and I'll check it out. But unless I say that, in general, I won't be following the chat super closely. What do you say? Ready to get started? Awesome. Love a good thumbs up. Okay. You stay on top. Hold on. Well, I guess that'll just be the way it is. Great. Mira already said most of this, so I won't go through it again, but just in case anyone wants to know more about me, you can find me at thetorastudio.org/Lexi. I also like to share a little verse that kind of orients my personal teaching philosophy when it comes to teaching Torah, which is V'chol banaich limudei Hashem v'rav shalom banaich, which can be understood in two ways. All your children are taught of Hashem, and great is the peace of your children. We should all learn Torah. We should all be coming here, engaging with the wisdom our tradition has to offer us. Or you could read it this way. All your children are lessons in Hashem, and great is the peace of your children, which is to say, every single one of us has our own wisdom and guidance and Torah to teach each other. So not only are we here with the text, but we're here with each other, and we have a lot to learn from both. And hopefully today will be a good example of how I see that playing out for myself. As we get into it, I've given a version of this talk previously at Congregation Ohab Shalom in Albany, New York, which is the first time I had a chance to start putting some of these thoughts together. So thanks to Rabbi Dan Orenstein for that opportunity, and to Mara and Mira at My Jewish Learning for this one. So let's get into it. Just a little overview of what we'll be doing in the next 53 or so minutes. We'll start talking about just the title of the shiur is Embodiment in Exile. So start by thinking about one framing of what the concept of exile might mean to us today, might look like in our experience. Thinking about that as exile as a disharmony of self and world. And then we'll kind of get on the table this rabbinic comparison or juxtaposition or equation between a person's body and land. There'll be a lot more to say about that at the moment, like when we get to it. And then we'll think about like, okay, what if gender dysphoria is a kind of exile, and where does that lead us? How does the way Torah talks about exile help us understand our experience as embodied people? And that's the basic question of the Shir. How does the concept of exile help us understand what it's like to be an embodied individual in this world? And as a trans person, a lot of that conversation for me looks like thinking about my experience of my body as gendered and about gender dysphoria, gender euphoria. And I also want to offer a third option, which we'll get to, but thinking basically, what if dysphoria is a kind of exile? What does that look like? And then we'll kind of play it out in a couple of exilic experiences from the tradition. We'll start with Cain's exile, or Cain's exile, as in Cain and Abel. And then we'll also look at the case of the accidental killer who has this asylum city to flee to, but also in the Mishnah that like asylum city that the accidental killer has as a refuge is also understood as the accidental killer going into a kind of exile. So this is what the roadmap looks like for the next little bit of time. Um, let's make it happen. Okay, so disharmony of self and world, just thinking about what is exile as an experience. This is a quote from the book Games, Agency as Art by C. Tai Nguyen. But games also offer, oh, I should say this is a book of philosophy about games as an art form. So it's not directly related either to Judaism or to exile, but I think this paragraph has it's like a very succinct and punchy summary of like what living in this world is like and what it's like when it falls short. And I think that is in some ways what the idea of being in exile is all about. Okay, I'll read. But games also offer one more promise. They can function as a refuge from the inhospitality of ordinary life. In games, we are given the right kinds of abilities, and not only do the abilities fit, but their exercise is often pleasurable and exciting. How unlike our own dreary world this is. Our abilities sometimes fit our goals in the world, but so often they do not. We do not fit in this world comfortably. The obstacles in our path are often intractable, exhausting, or miserable. So much of the world and the tasks it forces on us do not fit us well. Just read that again. So much of the world and the tasks it forces on us do not fit us well. I think that is an excellent one sentence definition of what exile is. It's the world not fitting us well. And just to help us kind of think about exile a little more for ourselves. I have a couple of questions for you all to reflect on. In general, when I have a question up here, I will encourage you to share in the chat. But these two questions are so so personal that you should just answer them for yourselves privately, maybe write it down. If you'd like to share in the chat, that would be amazing and certainly welcome, but no expectation of that at all. So think for yourself, what's a moment when the world asked something of you that you couldn't give? And what might it look like to fit in or find yourself in the right place? And in case you're worried, I will be answering these questions myself in a little bit. So I won't leave you hanging, but just reflect. I'll give us all a minute. What's a moment when the world asked something of you that you couldn't give? What might it look like to fit in or find yourself in the right place? Okay, hopefully you had a chance to reflect on that a bit. Just starting to get the juices flowing, getting our like awareness of exile kind of activated online, loaded up. Um, and now we'll go into the next section, keeping in mind like exile as like the world, essentially the way the world is not fitting us well. Okay, so now we'll talk about the rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud um, have this, like, come up with this kind of equation that like a person's body is like equivalent to land in some way. Um, and like insofar as like the classic definition of exile and diaspora in the Jewish tradition is like exile from land and from particular land. Um, so when the rabbis don't mention this body equals land specifically about exile, but once they put it on the table, I think it opens up a lot of room to think about what exile can feel like as a person whose body doesn't fit the world well, or or the other way around, the world not fitting a person's body or the way a person is embodied well. Um, in order to do that, though, I have to give a couple of fairly serious content warnings. And namely, this following section is going to discuss slavery, sterilization, and anti-Jewish xenophobia. If any or all of those three things are like, you're not here for that today, it is totally fine. You already got the basic idea, which is body equals land. And you're totally invited to like put your phone or your speaker on mute. Come back at the next section, which will be titled clearly Dysphoria as Exile. It'll look like this slide. You do not have to like sit here and listen to this if that's not going to be the right choice for you today. But in case it is, and you're here for this piece of the journey, why do I feel like we need to go here at all, given that these topics are kind of unsettling to say the least? It kind of touches on like, I think a major like concept in the way that the Torah works, which is that the Torah often teaches us a truth in its like worst possible manifestation. So as an example here, we're going to learn a truth about embodiment and land as it manifests as slavery and also sterilization. Um, and maybe you can imagine like how body, land, like the triangle of body, land, and slavery might be related, but the Torah will see it. But the Torah chooses the worst possible version of this truth, not just because it wants to upset us, but because we should know right away what the inherent dangers are when we're taking a comparison like this too far. Like there is a truth that body equals land. And if we take that too far, or if it gets abused, it will end up looking like could end up looking like slavery. And the Torah wants us to know that before we even get off the ground. So I'm taking us to these places not just to be upsetting and not just to be transparent about what the sources say, but like really to take some responsibility for the shadow sides of the concepts that I'm teaching today. So if you're here for it, let's go. If you're not here for it, you can definitely come back at the next section. But hopefully you understand at least why I want to take us here and why I think it's important. So we'll get basically two rabbinic learnings from the book of Vayikra, from the book of Leviticus. Okay, the first one is like body is to land as person is to property. So here's just what it says. V'hisnachaltem osam livneichem achareichem l'reshes achuza le'olam. Le'olam bahem ta'avodu v'acheichem b'nei Yisrael ish b'achiv lo sirdevo v'farech. So Vayikra chapter 25 verse 46 says, you may keep non-Jewish slaves as a possession for your children after you, for them to inherit as property for all time. Such you may treat as slaves, but as for your Israelite kin, no one shall rule ruthlessly over another. Essentially, you can keep the Torah says here you can keep non-Jews as slaves, and not only as slaves, but as like permanent slaves whose families you also will inherit as property. Just in case anyone's wondering, we've in the halacha, we do not think we can really do this anymore, but this is what the Torah says. And Rashi, who's like one of the first major commentators on Torah and Talmud, says in Kiddushin, which is a book in the Talmud, Adam hu kash lekarkaos dichsiv visnachaltemosam l'reshet sachuza. A person is conceptually interchangeable with land, as it is written, and you shall inherit them like real estate. When he makes this comment, it's also not in the context of slavery, it's in the context of marriage, which is its own interesting comparison, but not our topic today. This is like, I think, the clearest statement of this equation. Rashi says, Adam ukash lekarkos, a person is conceptually interchangeable with land. He gets it from this verse. And then he and the rabbis before him, he's not making this up, he uses it to just this equation to learn about things in all sorts of contexts where bodies might be interchangeable with land, might have something similar about them that we can learn out from. So that's one piece. We'll get another piece and then have a second to reflect on the bigger picture. Earlier on in the book of Vayikra, it says, "Zumaruch v'chasus v'natsuk v'charus lo sakrivo ad Hashem u'ba'artechem lo sa'asu." You shall not offer to Hashem anything with its testes bruised or crushed or torn or cut. You shall have no such practices in your own land. This is speaking about animals, animal sacrifice. And then in Masechet Shabbos in the Talmud, there's this statement, Minayin l'seirus ba'adam shehu asur, Talmud lomar uvartechem lo sa'asu, bachem lo sa'asu, divrei Rabbi Chanina. From where do we know that sterilizing a person is forbidden? The Torah says, do not do this on your land, on yourselves, do not do it. The words of Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Chanina is taking a verse that is about like a prohibition against offering animal sacrifices with certain types that have had certain things done to their testes. And the Torah says, don't do this in your land. Rabbi Hanina says, when the Torah says don't do it in your land, it means don't do it. It also means don't do it to your own self. Meaning there's also a comparison here between body and land, and what you can do on the land, you can't do what you can't do on your land, you can't do on your body. And maybe also what you shouldn't do on your body, you shouldn't do on the land. So we've got these two pieces. A person is conceptually interchangeable with land, and the Torah says, do not do this on your land, on yourselves, do not do it. So question for us to reflect on, and I would love to read what you have to say about this in the chat. What are all the problems and questions that come up for you with this rabbinic equation between bodies and land? Like I mentioned, it's a really big and potentially very problematic comparison to make. So let's just spend a couple minutes. What's coming up for you with this? Would love to hear problems or questions that you're sitting with before we move on to what might be like redemptive about this comparison. Hopefully it's okay if I read a couple. And if I don't read one, it's just because it's time to move on, not because I don't want to read it. Matthew shared prohibition against self-castration is problematic for trans people. Yeah, it's super problematic. I'll also, I've had an orchiectomy and am reading this verse, and yeah, it lands in a kind of a strange way for sure. Especially if we lose the ability to say, well, that verse is just about animals. We can see clearly like the rabbis applied it to humans also. So kind of where does that leave us? For sure. Very troubling to equate human bodies with a form of property. Yes, I fully agree. And again, I feel like that's an example of like the Torah taking it too far to warn us about about where we might end up if we take it too far. From the earth you were made, to the earth you shall return. That's like such a, I didn't even think about that when I was thinking about this, but like, why is body equal to land? It's because bodies come from land, because the earth is where we came from, Mother Earth, and we'll go back to it. So while we're in our bodies, we're not actually like, we shouldn't think that we're actually separate from the land, or that the way we should treat the land should be different than the way we should treat our body, or the other way around. I love that. On the other hand, it makes no sense to consider bodies and land as the same thing. Yeah, that's also totally a legit angle. Um, just reading everybody's, and then we'll move on. Yeah, yeah, wow. Oh, okay, there's a lot of great stuff in the chat. I encourage people to read it. And also, we're almost halfway through and we haven't even really gotten to the thing yet. So, but I did read everything said and appreciate everything. Okay. Let's move on to the next section. If you had your speaker off, there's no way you can hear what I'm saying, but we're in the next section, and that content warning is over. Although I do have to give a new content warning for this one. Obviously, we're going to be talking about gender dysphoria. And I'll just name, like, in these slides, it just says dysphoria. When I say that, it's understand it as a shorthand for gender dysphoria. There are, of course, other kinds of dysphoria. I'm not going to be talking about them. So let's think about, okay, we've got body equals land. So what if can we think of, so how does that lead us to think of gender dysphoria and gender euphoria? And I think, to me, it leads me to this: dysphoria as exile and euphoria as redemption. We'll also complicate that in a minute. But before we even go any further, just so we're all on the same page, um, the APA's definition of gender dysphoria, I'm not saying I'm fully signing on to every single thing that this says, but just so we basically are all on the same page, what are we talking about when we're talking about gender dysphoria? We could be talking about a lot of different things, but more or less, this is what I mean. I'll just read the part in bold. Some people who are transgender will experience gender dysphoria, which refers to psychological distress that results from an incongruence between one's sex assigned at birth and one's gender identity. Though gender dysphoria often begins in childhood, some people may not experience it until after puberty or much later. So that's one definition of gender dysphoria, just so we can all be talking about roughly the same thing. No one's experience is exactly the same. Many people, and especially when it comes to trans people's experience of gender, I would say most of our experiences are not even approximately the same. They're radically different. But just so I can use some words, we'll use the word dysphoria today. And also, I'm talking really here about my own experience of dysphoria and euphoria and body, and just putting it out there as an offer to people to kind of think about what the concepts of exile might look like, to help people understand at least my own one kind of trans experience, and also have another lens to understand Torah through, hopefully. So yeah, this is, all these things I think are true, but they're true of my own experience. So with all of those disclaimers, here's a little concept. Basically, let's take this equation, body equals land, really seriously and play it out. So here's what it looks like for me as a trans person. If land equals body, If land equals body, then exile equals dysphoria, redemption equals euphoria, and dwelling equals wholeness. Okay, so taking a step back for a second, you've got land, and you've got land that's somehow properly yours. And when you're no longer allowed on that land, able to be on that land, that's called exile. And when you come from exile to return to your land in kind of a permanent way, that's called in the Torah redemption or geula. And I think the act of living in that land we can call dwelling. Um, so seems to me like, okay, if land equals body, then like the experience of not being able to live in my body, to me, at least when it comes to gender, that feels like dysphoria. And the experience of moving through dysphoria to return to being able to inhabit my body in a way that feels like I'm really there, that feels to me like euphoria. And me being able to do that in kind of a sustained and like, yeah, in a sustained way, that to me feels like wholeness. Obviously, wholeness is a complicated term, but here I mean it really in the sense of this quote from Psalms, which reads, I have set Hashem before me constantly, for I will not stumble from my right hand. Therefore, my heart rejoices and my soul sings, even my flesh shall dwell securely. So what does it mean for flesh to dwell securely? What does it mean for exile to be somehow equivalent to dysphoria, or redemption somehow equivalent to euphoria? Let's get into it a little bit more with a few examples of what this equation and what this concept map might actually feel like. And we'll do that with two stories from the Torah. So starting with the second exile ever, Cain's exile or Cain's exile from, well, just to summarize the story, and I'll say first, I'll be saying the names like this in their like Hebrew pronunciations, Cain, Hevel, and Hashem. I've been saying Hashem a lot. Hashem refers to the name like Yud K Vav K and literally means the name. When I say Cain, you might be more familiar with the name Cain. When I say Hevel, you might be more familiar with the name Abel. Just a little background. Oh, right. So Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, are exiled from the Garden of Eden, and they have two children, Cain and Hevel, Cain and Abel. And you know, the two of them grow up, and Cain becomes a farmer. Hevel becomes a shepherd, and Hevel decides to make a sacrifice to Hashem. It's not clear why. So he makes a sacrifice of one of his animals. Cain is like, that's a great idea. Let me also make a sacrifice to Hashem. So Cain offers a sacrifice of wheat or whatever produce he's growing. And Hashem like acknowledges Hevel's offering, but does not acknowledge Cain's offering. Cain, understandably, I think, gets pretty upset. And angry, and Hashem is like, what are you so angry for? Just like keep trying, and eventually if you do the right thing, you'll find uplift. And not super clear what Cain's response to that is, immediate response anyway, but he like somehow brings Havel out into a field. Something happens. Cain kills Havel, and then Hashem is like, "Where's Havel? Where's your brother?" And Cain's like, "I don't know where my brother is. Am I supposed to be keeping an eye on my brother all the time?" And Hashem is like, "I can hear your brother's blood crying out to me from the land." And then Cain is like, "Oh my God, you caught me." And Hashem says, well, because you did this, you are exiled from the land, you're cast out, you'll be a wanderer forever, and there'll be a mark on you so that people should know this horrible thing you did. And then Cain kind of spends the rest of his life that way, or maybe not, as we'll see later. But that is basically the story of Cain's exile. And there's a few moments in it that I wanna highlight. So I think they speak a lot to, like, at least my experience as a trans person, and I think shed a lot of light on what the experience of exile might feel like. So here we go. So there's this statement in the Torah, Vayisha Hashem el Havel ve'el minchaso ve'el Cain ve'el minchaso lo sha'ah. Hashem regarded Havel and his offering, but Cain and his offering Hashem did not regard. So what does it mean, regard? This is a midrash, a kind of rabbinic exegesis or fan fiction on the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis. So they comment here. Hashem regarded Havel and his offering, meaning he was satisfied with him. But Cain and his offering, Hashem did not regard, meaning he was not satisfied with him. That is to say, with Cain himself. So here, exile sprouts at the moment when the true self is rejected. Meaning, what's this midrash saying Hashem rejected? It's not that Hashem was so pleased with Havel's animal that he offered, and it's not that Hashem was so displeased with Cain's grain that he offered. Hashem was pleased with who Havel was and what he was doing, but Hashem was not pleased with who Cain was and what Cain was doing. And to me, this makes me think of, like, what's going on here? Essentially, there's a child showing up, offering something from themselves that they've invested their life in, that they feel like represents what they have to offer in the world, how they can show up in the world. Cain is a farmer. What's he going to offer besides produce? It's almost like, what could he have done? And when Hashem rejects that offering, the midrash here says Hashem wasn't satisfied, but I think we could also understand it as, like, Cain took Hashem's rejection of the offering to mean that Hashem was rejecting Cain himself, not just his offering. And this to me is like, you can imagine, like, a closeted trans girl who's very young, maybe like 4 or 5 years old, and she, like, wants to show up in front of her parents wearing a dress, and when she does that, she gets rejected for the offering of herself that she brings in front of them. And maybe the parents are just rejecting the dress itself, but at least in my experience, the child is gonna experience that rejection, not just of the offering, but actually of who they are as a person. So obviously in Cain's case, this rejection basically leads him to murder someone. I am not saying that there is in any way a comparison between Cain's story and, like, an experience of dysphoria or being rejected as a trans person, like, in general. But I think this one moment, where at this point, Cain really hadn't done anything wrong. This moment of rejection is what sets Cain on the path towards exile. And in a similar sense, those moments of rejection in a trans childhood can be what set people on the path towards dysphoria. In other words, dysphoria is not a necessary experience of transness. It's something that arises from the way that the world treats us. And to go back to the very first quote from Games Agency as Art, the Nguyen quote, the experience of the world not fitting who we are well is actually here kind of a problem with the world. And whatever that might suggest about the way the world needs to change, the way we end up changing to fit the world, this moment of like, where does exile start? Where can exile begin? Where can dysphoric experiences become internalized? I think it might be when our offerings of who we are rejected. Pause for a moment to take a sip of water. Yeah, I see Zip in the chat is saying the experience of the world not fitting who we are well, also a neurodivergent experience. I think this kind of thing applies really broadly to a lot of types of people that the world isn't, that we haven't built the world for. Um, and yeah, I can only speak to who I am. But I'm glad people are like seeing themselves in this. That is a good sign. Okay, so further on in Cain's story, Cain kills Havel, and then Hashem says, "You're going to be exiled and wandering the land forever." This is what Cain says to Hashem in response. Vayomer Cain al Hashem gadol avoni minaso. And Cain said to Hashem, "My sin or my punishment is too great to bear. Behold, this day you have driven me out from the face of the earth, and I must hide from your presence, and I shall waver and wander in the land, and it will be that anyone who finds me could kill me." And I think each one of these lines speaks to a trans experience of exile. I'll just play it out for a bit. This is how I see them. When Cain says, "My sin or my punishment is too great to bear," like that, first of all, that feels true some days. Like, I can't handle this. I'm not strong enough to be able to manage the situation that I find myself in, like the dysphoria that I'm experiencing. And also, like, the experience, this is whatever, the experience of like sin and punishment being kind of the same thing. Like, when when it feels like you're punished for something, it can feel like you did something wrong. Whether it's actually because you deserve the punishment or not, there's like something that I think is like hard to get away from, of like, sometimes I blame myself for my own dysphoria, or from the like way that people on the street treat me. And like, I don't think that's really right or correct, but I do think it's like, it is something that actually that genuinely happens to us, that we confuse punishment and sin. Um, and that's just something to be aware of. And Cain is saying, like, he's worried about that. He's worried that that's going to happen to him. The next piece, "Behold, this day you have driven me out from upon the face of the earth." Driven me out from upon the face of the earth. I can't be on my land. I can't live in my body anymore. This is like, where am I going to be if I can't be in my body? Where is Cain going to live if he can't live anywhere? The exile of Cain is from like the entire earth. And he goes on to say, "I must hide from your presence," meaning like, not only am I not going to be able to live anywhere, I'm not going to be able to show up to you, God. I am not going to be able to bring myself into like divine relationship. How am I going to pray? I'm supposed to pray 3 times a day. Who am I going to pray to if I can't be in my body, if I can't bring myself to the experience of your world? Where am I going to be able to find God? I think before transitioning, a lot of my spiritual potential, a lot of my spiritual energy was trapped, was totally inaccessible. I couldn't manifest it. It's like you feel this huge thing that's like kind of in shadows somewhere inside your soul. And like, for me, once I started transitioning, that was able to come forward, and I was able to figure out who that energy leads me to be, who it leads me to show up as, and to lead me to like have more regular and more fulfilling and more impactful experiences of the presence of God. Cain goes on, "And I shall waver and wander in the land," meaning like he's saying in the land, like even when he's on the land, even when I'm in my body, I'm not going to be able to stay in one place. I'm not going to be able to rest anywhere. I spend too long, like kind of in conscious awareness of my body. Eventually I'll get really dysphoric, really upset. I'll have to leave. Maybe there's one part of my body that feels good today, but then being aware of that part makes me too aware of a different part of my body, and then I can't be anywhere. And there's like a kind of, I've also found that like there's a kind of like amount. I don't know if other people have this experience, but there's like an amount of dysphoria that I just have. And like, if I get rid of it in one part, it kind of like adds on, it just like goes into the other, like a different part of my body where I haven't like dealt with yet or whatever. And it just like makes that part worse. There's like a fluidity to how dysphoria manifests in the body, to like the moments where we are in exile in our own bodies. And like there's this one, but it really feels like wavering and wandering. I don't always know when I wake up where I'm going to be able to like inhabit fully. And similarly, Cain doesn't always know when he's going to wake up, where he's going to end up being the next day. And I think there's also like a literal application of exile as wavering and wandering in the land that that it's essentially like a lack of stability, a lack of being able to rely that where you are today is going to be where you are tomorrow. Okay, and then the last thing he says, "V'haya kol motzi yahargeni," which I translated here, and it will be that anyone who finds me could kill me. Now, this is maybe kind of surprising, setting aside like where are all the other people coming from? He's the first person who was ever born on Earth. What does he mean? Anyone who finds me could kill me now? Couldn't anyone who finds him kill him before? But maybe now they'll just have a reason to. Like, what is he actually saying here? I think part of what he's saying is like maybe now he's just aware of the fact that anyone who finds me could kill me because he invented murder. But aside from that, I think he's also saying he's now got this awareness of vulnerability because he is not able, because he doesn't have that land, that place to rely on, because he's wandering. He doesn't have people, he doesn't have community. He doesn't have beyond human community to feel, to give him a sense of safety. So now he's hyper aware of the fact of his vulnerability in the land. Anyone who finds me could kill me. I'm aware that anyone who finds me could kill me. And similarly, like when I started transitioning, I became like, I had this like hugely increased sense of vulnerability. Part of that, I think, is because of the direction I was transitioning from, but I think not only because of that. Where it's like I'm walking around, I feel really scared of what anyone might do to me, might say to me. And obviously people could do and say things to me before, but now that I like don't have this groundedness of my body, or like what it really was before was like a false sense of groundedness in my body, and in like being able to rely on the people around me to like treat me as if I'm fully grounded in my body, or as if, you know, whatever it might be. Like it's scary to walk around. It's scary to travel. And I mean, that's also definitely gotten worse with all of the legislation being passed in the United States. This sense, this like anyone who finds me could kill me kind of consciousness. Maybe not always as extreme, thank God, as anyone who finds me could kill me, but it definitely to me is part of like an exilic experience to feel vulnerable around other people because you don't have some core thing to be able to fall back on, to be able to rely on. For Cain, that's literally, I think, a regular place to live, a home. For me as a trans person, that has been like my ability to dwell in my body, but also my like manifesting of like, I'm not only trans, I'm doing something about it, and transitions are messy, and messiness, especially when it comes to gender messiness, feels very vulnerable because you're just so aware of what other people are might be thinking all the time. And it's just, again, hard to show up. It just feeds into the "I must hide from your presence" line from before. Well, okay. Well, we'll keep going. I encourage people to continue sharing reflections in the chat, which I'm finding very enjoyable. Okay. One last piece on Cain's exile. So that's where he's at when he starts this exile. Where is he at kind of once he's been sitting with it for a while? I think this is something we often leave out. I've been talking a lot about my experiences from before transition and my early transition. But I've been transitioning for a number of years now, and trans people grow up and get old, thank God. At least we can, and we do, a lot of us. So what is it like once we've kind of let the exile mature? So this is from later on. Cain knew his wife. He gets married, has a family. Cain knew his wife and she became pregnant and she gave birth to Hanoch. And Cain was building a city and he called the name of the city as the name of his son, Hanoch. So Ramban, who's an 12th century commentator on the Torah, among other things, notes this strange language of Cain was building a city. Like, what do you mean he was building a city? I would expect it to say Cain built a city. So what's going on here? Ramban says, and the fact that it does not say, and he built a city, this teaches that he was building the city all his days, because his deeds were cursed. He would build a little with great effort and struggle, and then wander and weave away from that place, and then return and build a little. Meaning, Cain's trying to find a place for himself in the land. He's building a city. But what is it like to build a city when you have this, like he literally has an exilic curse on him. I definitely don't think transness is a curse, but certainly dysphoria feels like a curse sometimes. So like, what does it look like when you try to establish yourself? What does it feel like when you're like, yeah, I'm finally gonna transition and I'm gonna do it and I'm gonna like find my place in my body in the world. For Cain, that looked like being constantly in the process of building the city all his days. He would build a little with great effort and struggle. You know, you like put in all this work and you finally get to see a doctor and they prescribe you your hormone replacement therapy or whatever it might be. You like decide on pronouns that feel good to you and you like share them with your friends and your family. That's like a huge step. And it takes so much great effort and struggle. You build a little, but then like you feel really good for a week. I hope you feel really good for a week, but then, it's not like you're done. You wander and weave away from that place. You have to go away. There's a cycle, and then you return and build a little more and build a little more. Which is to say, like, the process of going from exile to redemption, from dysphoria to euphoria, from being unable to be in your body to being able to be in your body is not linear. And like some doesn't always isn't even always clear that you're moving in like a particular direction. You put in a lot of effort to take a step, and then like you don't immediately build on the next step. Always you wander away and then you come back and you build a little more when you're able to. But it's to say like it's a lifelong process of returning. And Cain was involved in that too, even though he had like the worst curse imaginable. And he did, I think, one of the worst things ever, especially at the time, he did one of the worst things ever. And like even he is able to find some, not like an end to his exile exactly, but some kind of like balance where he can go back and forth and not be like in a complete exile like we might imagine. He gets married. He has a family, he has people, and he has someone to build the city for, even if it's not going to be for himself, even if he can't dwell in that city, his children can, the people who come after him can. And that's a lot of what I think about, like, as we continue to advance in like medical technology, the capacity to do all sorts of medical transition things, not to mention like all the like non-medical work we're doing on understanding trans experience, on like moving society forward to a place where there's more gender freedom. All these things are like not things I experienced personally in my childhood, a lot of them. But I'm invested in building that city partly so that I can be in it sometimes, but really so that the people who can come after me can be in it all the time. So that's Cain's story and a little bit of what I get from it with this body equals land equation. I want to get one more thing on the table, and I'll skip a little bit, but this is the exile of the accidental killer. Basically in the Torah, if someone kills someone accidentally, then there's a city that they can flee to kind of keep, the idea is to keep them safe from the Blood Avenger, who's like kind of wandering around trying to take their revenge. Um, but so like in the Torah, it seems like that's a refuge city in favor of the accidental killer. In the Mishnah, though, this is framed as an exile. The accidental killer is exiled to this asylum city. There's a lot to say about it. We only have a couple minutes, so I just want to say two things. Here's this one statement from the Mishnah about this topic. When someone who accidentally killed a person returns home from their exile in the asylum city, so they were in the asylum city, the Blood Avenger died, or no, not the blood of the Kohen Gadol died. The details don't matter. For whatever reason, they returned to the exile. They returned from exile to their home. There's two opinions about kind of what happens to them. One, they return to the position they formerly held. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says they do not return to the position they formerly held. And you're like, okay, you were in exile for a while. You went away. You had like, you transitioned, whatever that means. Are you like, what kind of life are you going back to? Are you going to return to the position you formerly held? Are you basically the same person going back to your life, but now with a new gender? Or are you not going to return to the position you formerly held? Are you actually like a completely new person who no longer fits into that same picture of what home meant? Is home now different for you because of your experience of exile? I'm sure that it's somewhere in the course of the Talmud and Halacha, this question is resolved. But here in the Mishnah, it's left open, and I think it names a real tension of like, what does it look like to build that city, or to return home, to be where you were before you before you started transitioning or whatever it was you did. Are you going to return to what it was formerly like and see how the pieces like don't quite fit in, but try to make it work? Or are you not going to return to what it was formerly like? And try to build something entirely new, even if it's maybe in the same physical location. Okay, last one. Speaking about the accidental killer, the Torah says, and this is the case of a killer who flees there to an asylum city and lives. This is someone who strikes their fellow unknowingly, and one did not hate the other yesterday or the day before, just defining like who has the right to access this asylum city, what are the circumstances. Now the Talmud comments, uses this verse to learn something kind of surprising. Tana, Talmid Shigila Megalin Ribo Imo Shne'amar V'chai. Avidle midi letave lechiyusa. It is taught. A student who is exiled has their rabbi exiled with them, as it is said, and they live there, and they live there. Something is done for them so that they can have a life. Which is to say, like, when you go into exile, when you're experiencing some kind of exilic experience, for me, that has been like primarily gender dysphoria. It's not just that like, okay, you're doing that and like, good luck to you, and I'm going to be aware of that. Actually, you have your rabbi exiled with you, as it is said, and you live there. Something's done for you so that you can have a life. I think this is just now striking me. The fact that it's your rabbi who's exiled with you, the people who are your teachers, the people who are supposed to understand you and guide you through life, can only do that if they understand your experience in some way. They go into exile with you, and then they can keep teaching you. If they didn't go into exile with you, maybe they wouldn't be able to be your rabbi anymore. But more broadly, I think what the Talmud is saying with this statement, something is done for them so that they can have a life. It's not just like, oh, you're like going through this really hard time and like, hopefully you make it through okay, or like you manage to like just survive. The Talmud is saying, no, you're like experiences of exile are not times where you can just we can just let each other barely scrape by. We need to build lives for each other in the places where we are, whether it's exilic or not, whether it's the perfect fit or not, whether it's where we'd ideally like to be or not. We have to do things for each other so that we can have full lives, as full as possible, wherever it is that we find ourselves. So we may all be in exile in this world and in the bodies we find ourselves in. And for me, we have two duties, which are also two joys in being aware of this. One is to remember that other people are not just bodies to be treated as property, but imperfect vessels for selves and souls. And our second duty and our second joy, to do what we can for each other, to make this imperfect exile into a life worth living. I'll pause here for a couple minutes and see if anyone has anything you want to share in the chat. I'll take a minute to read and then, yeah, just spend a bit of time. Any reflections on any of this that anyone wants to share? Mm. Mm. Thanks, Benj. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks for being here. Um, Mira, did you want to wrap us up?
Sure. Lexi, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to share a copy of this recording with everyone who registered, and it will be posted on our website. And we hope to see everyone again and more Jewish learning experiences and opportunities. Thank you all for learning with us today. Bye, everyone.